Yes, he will come. Ah, he's here. Yes. Joachim, can you start? No? Yes. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so hello everybody. I'm very happy to introduce Paul Shrivastava today. Thank you very much for coming. Paul, he is always on long travels, as you can imagine, when the talk is about future Earth. I think quite exactly, it may be on the day 5 years ago, I was participating in one of the preparatory meetings for Future Earth in San Francisco. It was not yet called Future Earth, actually. We were at this time still discussing about several different alphabet soups, and finally decided that it should not be another alphabet soup, it should have a more sensible wording, and at this time we actually forbid ourselves to use a thing like FE. So, and I think it has remained actually. So it has kind of, in this sense, developed quite differently from normal abbreviations, which you have to look up in a dictionary before you understand it. So since then I have been involved in the development. It has been a complicated development because it has been a very participative development, and I think you will hear a lot on the way it is structured, this decade initiative on international global environmental and socio-environmental research is shaped now. In February 2015, finally, after 4.5 years, the recruitment of the executive director was becoming a fact, and it was Paul. I was personally delighted actually to have someone with the direction Paul has, because although we also told ourselves that we are very universally, have teams which are very built up very universally, I always felt that it had too big focus on environmental science. So Paul has been the director of an institute focused on sustainable enterprise. So he brought in a different focus, and this is why I thought it was a really good choice actually. Since then, Paul is or has been struggling with the final institutional build-up, which I think has reached a very good state now. In our last governing council meeting in Tokyo about half a month ago, where we met last time, it was becoming clear that the 5 global hubs, and Paul is going to explain you what this is staffed, and the people are around and can start to be operational. Paul has a long career in what might be summarized in sustainable enterprise science, sustainable enterprise management. I don't go into his whole CV. He has been born in Bhopal in India, has spent, I think, much of his life in Canada, but you might or might not know, probably you don't know, that he's, for example, an enthusiastic tango dancer, so he's always spending at least some days in Buenos Aires, really not just looking at the tango dances, but practicing it. So this maybe gives you a kind of a feeling and a flavor of how versatile and how broadly interested he really is. So I don't want to use more of your time, Paul. We're very happy to have you here. One thing I should tell you is that Paul would like to involve you and to show you where we can get interested in future Earth. He would also like to find out how it looks in the other direction, how future Earth can get engaged with CEF and with other actors. I'm very happy to see people from other institutions here. So this should be a two-way conversation. Thank you very much, Paul, for coming.
Thank you. I don't know whether to blush or to smile, but thank you for that very generous introduction. And what I'd like to do here today is start a conversation with all of you about what we are trying to do. With a name like Future Earth, it kind of starts setting some expectations about what we are trying to do. And I want to be a little bit humble about it and not promise that we are going to deliver to you the future of the Earth. We are all doing this jointly. The purpose of this talk is to introduce to you a rather complex and evolving ecosystem for science and how science can become more useful and responsive to needs of society. It's something that is work in progress. The organization, although it started, the kernels of it started 5 years ago, and I joined almost a year ago. It's still in a design phase. And I think this design phase is going to last for a while, because the kind of future we want to collectively achieve is, will take hard work, and it will take sort of restructuring both society towards sustainability, but also restructuring science. So I'm going to try to explain to you what it is that we are doing. And before I do that, I just want to point out that the talk that I'm going around doing around different parts of the world have three basic components to them. The first is kind of context, setting the stage for do we have a clicker for okay.
I don't know the machine. It's not can anybody.
I
maybe
can,
can do.
yeah, okay, I can use that now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first part of the talk is about context, and I'm going to keep that short because you are in a center for development studies that already knows about this context, but I will just use maybe 2 or 3 slides to point out where the conversation on designing future Earth is coming from. In the second part of the talk, I want to talk about the positives that have happened in the last year and are going to be happening. That there is we are at a different point in the world now, and I want to frame it within a positive context of the consensus that we are achieving on where to move now in the next century or so. And then talk about future Earth as the bridge, and then finally I should have put down UNU and ZEF collaboration, because this is something that we want to do collectively. I had originally thought I was going to visit Jakob, and only lately realized that we were going to do the talk within ZEF. But everything that I say about UNU collaboration is also true about you, as I learned this morning from Jakob, talking to him briefly. Okay, so let's look at the context, and I want to do that by just pointing out that we are at a point of discontinuity. In the big history of things, there has been in the last 60 or so years what we've been calling the Great Acceleration in human trends. So whether it is population, whether it is GDP, foreign direct investment, primary energy use, large dams, water use, fertilizer, paper, urban, virtually on everything, you see a kind of inflection point somewhere around the 1950s, so like maybe mid-50s, after the Second World War, when the world started building up. All these hockey stick type curves just start taking off around the 50s. Everything is sort of starting low, and then you see this kind of rise. So this we call the Great Acceleration, of course prompted by population primarily, but then along with population, the development of technology and the production and consumption of goods. And this has created certain effects on the environment. So these effects include accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, nitrous oxide, methane, stratospheric ozone. On the ozone side, you see a kind of a plateauing because of the successful ozone treaty. But there is a kind of parallel between what we have been able to accomplish as human beings, our growth as humans, and its impact on society. So we are coming to a point where we are understanding that we are living in a different time. And the other piece of this understanding is that we are now impacting nature in a very different way. So a lot of natural phenomenon, if we can even call them natural, are being dramatically influenced by humans. And so some geologists have been talking about this idea that we are living in a new a geological era called the Anthropocene, and I know it's a controversial term, so I don't want to belabor the term, but just want to point out a different thing about the Anthropocene, that the challenges that we are creating now, besides being human-driven, are driven by less than 1/4 of the global population. The human aspiration to continue in this direction is tremendous. The rest of the world, people living in Africa and China and India, would like to live like you and me, have 2 cars in the garage and a refrigerator and all the good things, unless something changes in the mindset. So we are in the Anthropocene, and we are geared to, unless we change direction, to go further in the direction of influencing nature in negative ways. And this has brought us to a set of planetary boundaries. We are realizing that we are in some areas, and this is work from the Stockholm Resilience Center. The earlier 2 charts were from studies that were done by other parts of Future Earth researchers from the IGBP program. But the idea that we are now at a kind of physical boundary, that we can continue to move in that direction, but we are going to destroy parts of the ecosystem and what supports life on Earth. So this is sort of our 15,000-year history in 3 slides. We are at a point of disjuncture, we are at a point of discontinuity, and we are at a point of decision. We need to change things. And in this context, we have some very positive things that have happened. So you can either look at the problem side of the picture, and there's a big litany, and you can have many scientific charts describing all the damages that have happened. Or you can also look at what's positive that is happening. And I just want to point out 3 or 4 things that have come together based on years, perhaps 5, 6 years of discussion, that have just been focused in the 2015-16 period. The first being the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, the realization that we are more prone to disasters. These disasters are occurring more frequently. They're causing more damages. We need a global framework, a global agreement in which we can manage these risks. The Sustainable Development Goals that were signed in September, 190 some nations coming together to agree what directions we want to move in terms of sustainability goals. The Climate Treaty that got signed last week, and the Habitat 3, which is also going to be coming up with a big treaty next year. So what does global consensus mean? I don't think we fully understand the power of a global consensus, because through human history, it has never happened. We've never had global consensus on anything. We've had national agendas, and we have regional agendas, and we have sub-regional agendas. But this kind of global operation where we all say, we acknowledge, this is a huge political accomplishment. And it is a different accomplishment from the ones that we have had in even the last 50 years, because it has the consensus of the political classes on the one side, but it also has an understanding and support of businesses and industry, the scientific establishment, and in some areas even the faith-based conversations around these issues. So I think there is a truly coming together of humans across the globe understanding what is happening, what we need to be thinking about, where we need to be moving. And to me, this is a very positive sign. It has taken a lot of energy over the last few years to architect each one of these agreements. I just came back from COP21, and I cannot tell you, these 20,000 people that descended on Paris, the level of excitement and the level of commitment and the level of innovation that it reflected. It was, and I'm not praising the treaty that we got out of it. I mean, there are lots of holes in it. It's not perfect by any stretch, but there is a kind of spirit behind the treaty that is visible in the negotiators, in the scientists, in the people that participated. So I think that we are at a juncture in human history that we really have an opportunity to reposition, to redirect the human enterprise as it relates to the natural environment, and do it in a way that we come up with a different understanding. And who is going to create that new understanding? I believe science, both natural sciences and social sciences, have a very major role to play. And this is where Future Earth comes in. In 2012, when the last Rio summit, there was a kind of understanding that we've been doing a lot of science, which has told us a lot about the problems. But if you look at the sustainability indicators that have been studied, virtually on every single one of them, things have become worse. So we need to change something. And a few things that were identified for change. One was this idea that historically science has been done in disciplinary silos. And just for those of you who are sort of from the science side, it might be interesting to note that in 1251, when the University of Paris was founded, there were 4 disciplines: logic, music, mathematics, and theology, I think. By 1700s, when all the universities were sort of getting formed in Europe, the number of disciplines had increased to about 150. By the time the UK started keeping statistics on academic disciplines, there were about 1,400 disciplines. Today, the National Science Foundation Register of Disciplines, maintained by one single country, US, and so it's not complete, it's not comprehensive. Guess how many disciplines they list and fund? Anybody want to take a guess? 8,430. And this is in their own description, in their own register, they claim this is not a complete set. It does not include the entire field of business disciplines that I come from. It does not include education as a field of study. Those are called fields of study, they're not disciplines. In a world that needs planetary understanding, in a world that needs holistic understanding, to fragment knowledge into 8,400 and whatever number of pieces, and look deeply into each piece, clearly the time has come to change that. So transdisciplinarity is the idea that we want to think outside, not think only within disciplinary boundaries. We need to stretch those boundaries towards inter and multidisciplinary, and then move towards transdisciplinarity, which to me is not a continuum from inter and multidisciplinary. It's a different, comes from a different epistemic base. It's a way of starting to look at problems on the ground and using that as the basis to develop research agendas so that you can solve the problems rather than just thinking about them or understanding them. The second idea that came out was that we need this more holistic, integrative, systemic understanding that provokes actions. And the third idea was this notion of stakeholder engagement, that we cannot continue to do science for each other as scientists. We need to bring in users, we need to bring in funders, we need to bring in people who are going to actually benefit from the science that we do. So a more responsive science that implies a kind of co-design and co-production of knowledge that science has not seen in its first 300 years of history. So Future Earth was designed with this broad agenda of trying to produce transdisciplinary, stakeholder-engaged. It's a global platform for international research collaboration on environmental change and sustainable development, providing integrated research, strengthening partnerships between researchers, funders, through co-design of research, and I will say a few things about each of these things in a minute, and then developing solutions to be more responsive to the need for a more nimble innovation system for global sustainability. So this is our official reason for existence. What we are doing now is not exactly new, although Future Earth as a term has been around only for a few years. The science of Future Earth has been around for at least 3 decades, and I want to acknowledge the excellent work of many scientists whose legacy we want to take into the future. Most of them come from the programs that you listed there, see listed, WCRP, the World Climate Research Program, formed in 1980 and still continuing to exist. The next 3 programs International Geosphere Biosphere Program, Diversitas, which is a big biodiversity program, and the International Human Dimensions Program. Those three have now been closed. IGBP is closing at the end of this month. And the projects from these programs are now within Future Earth. And the way we are modifying these programs is to move them more in a direction of transdisciplinarity, stakeholder engagement. And in addition to the research programs, the other two things that I want to point out that we are very focused on doing is providing the science inputs at a global level into policy forums like the IPCC, like the IPBES. So the best science that we can cull together from climate change goes into the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and similarly for IPBES for biodiversity. So we are kind of a conduit for science to come and address questions of policy. And we have aspirations to take science directly also to society, because we think that in the next century, science is not going to be something that the Brahmins in academia and all control as experts. It's going to be a much more democratic system, which needs to get into the hands of the public directly. And there are some very smart people out there who can use the benefits of science, and we produce it in a way and we deliver it in a way that they can understand and bring to action. Okay. So who are the people who have created this vision and created this kind of organization? In this slide you see the list of our governing council members, United Nations University, UNEP, UNESCO, some of the UN bodies that need globally relevant policy science. We consider them as users. Then you have organizations like ICSU and ISSC, which is the International Science Union, and International Social Science Council that coordinate global science. And we have people like the Belmont Forum, which is the body that coordinates the G20 nations funding, science funding bodies, so BMBF and DFG in Germany, or National Science Foundation of China, or South Africa, or US. These are all members of the Belmont Forum. And then we have things like the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, which is attempting to take science solutions to society directly. The WBCSD, which is the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And the Science and Technology and Society Forum, which is a Japanese science technology society organization that brings politicians together to address challenges of bringing science into policy making. In terms of governance, so we have this governing council that I mentioned earlier that sits on top, and then we have these two structures called the Science Committee and the Engagement Committee. The Science Committee, all of you know because you work in science organizations, we need science steering committees, everything from research projects, in our case for our organization, strategic thinking. But we have this interesting thing called the Engagement Committee. It consists of non-scientists, people who come from the real world. They may be politicians. The chairperson of this committee is Jairam Ramesh, who's an environment minister in the previous government in India. There are people who come from, there are medical doctors, there are NGO people, the World Wildlife Foundation president. So there are people who are from society that we are bringing right at the policy making level of governance, so that whatever is happening in top strategic thinking gets influenced by these key stakeholders. Then the work of the Secretariat is done through what are called Secretariat Global Hubs and Secretariat Regional Centers. So we have 5 global hubs. It's a distributed Secretariat concept. We are not located in one place. There are 5 major functions that the Secretariat serves: communication, coordination, research enabling, capacity building, and synthesis and foresight. All these 5 functions are delivered through these 5 global hubs. The hubs are based in Montreal, Canada, Paris, France, Tokyo, Japan, Stockholm, Sweden, and Boulder, Colorado, USA. each hub leads or co-leads one or two of the functions. So we have a kind of resilient system built in to the Secretariat. I'm the executive director, so my office is located in Canada for now, but it could be located at any of the hubs. And one of the reasons I'm traveling so much is to try to make presence available in all the 5 locations. In addition, we have 4 regional centers. The Asia Pacific Center is based in Kyoto. The European Center is currently based at the Tyndall Center in the UK. The Latin American Center is based at IAI in Uruguay. And the MENA, or the Middle East and North Africa Center, is based at the Cyprus Institute in Cyprus. The purpose of the regional centers is to translate global goals, global agendas of Future Earth to regions, because we believe that the implementation of sustainability or climate change solutions or economic solutions is going to happen at the regional level. You cannot just articulate them in abstract global terms. You need to actually put them on the ground in the regions. And also to translate the regional aspirations to and bring it to the global level. So that's the purpose of the regional centers. In addition, we have a sub-regional entity called regional offices that is going to start building up. There are 3 of them being planned for Africa, 1 for South Asia. So we are building this sort of secretarial infrastructure so that we can start deploying this kind of transdisciplinary stakeholder-engaged science on a global basis. There's a public document. I won't belabor the point, but this is the document that kind of articulates the vision of Future Earth. I'll just read out a couple of visions to give you a flavor, because they overlap very much with the things that you all are already doing. And if I take that sheet that Jakob gave me today, this morning, many of them are already over here. So number 1 is deliver water, energy, and food for all, and manage the synergies and trade-offs among them. The second one is decarbonize socioeconomic systems to stabilize the climate by promoting the technological, economic, social, political, and behavioral transformation. The third one is safeguard terrestrial freshwater, marine natural assets, biodiversity, ecosystem services by managing their valuation and governance. And the next one is on building healthy, resilient cities, promoting sustainable rural futures, improving human health interactions. So the thing that I want to point out about these goals is that, first of all, they're not new. You guys have them, you all are doing research on these issues. The sustainable development goals, if you mapped on, they would map right on to all of these. So what is different? The one thing that I want to point out that is different is that all our goals are written in a way that focus on interconnections. We don't see food, water, energy as sectoral issues. There are clear trade-offs and synergies between producing food, water, and energy. Every bite of food you take, you are guzzling gallons and gallons of water that is required to produce that food. If you're eating a non-vegetarian diet, your water consumption or virtual water that is embedded in that food is much higher than if you're eating vegetarian diets. So we need to understand these things in a connection. So that's why we call it the food, water, energy nexus. We are interested in the nexus, in the interdependencies, in a complex, connected ecosystem. So that's something that we want to focus in terms of our vision, and all of the vision statements are put down this way. You can look at the vision document, and there's a supporting document called Strategic Research Agenda that breaks down these 8 vision areas into specific research topics that we are encouraging people to engage in. Okay, this is just the global footprint, 5 hubs, 4 regional centers, and the core projects where they are located. So core projects is where our science gets done. I mentioned earlier that we have these 3 programs that closed down, and we took the core projects from them. So these are the core projects that cover everything from biodiscovery, biogenesis, Earth systems governance. AIMS is the modeling project, climate change and agriculture and food security. Eco-health is a health project. So they cover a wide range of areas. There are around 60,000 scientists that are reached by the network of these core projects. So it's a big group of scientists. And we provide assessments and policy inputs into the IPCC, IPBES. We also did the same thing for the development of sustainable development goals. And the way this process works is we feed science summaries, but we also feed science expertise. So, for example, IPBES now, they're going to meet in Kuala Lumpur in February for their big assembly. And I believe we recommended 60 names of scientists from our community to be experts and writers of reports and doers of the assessment. So that's how we bring inputs into these big assessment processes. And then we try to build, we're building a science society interface in the form of an open network for scientists and stakeholders. This will be opened up early in 2016. And we're going to be launching a magazine called the Anthropocene Magazine. It used to be called the Conservation Magazine and is supported by the MacArthur Foundation for curating a discussion on the Anthropocene in the public. So this is not a science product, but it is an attempt to reach out broadly beyond traditional audiences of science. So the piece that I want to focus on a little bit more is this new research structure that was approved recently in our November meetings in Kyoto by our Science and Engagement Committee called Knowledge Action Networks. And you can think of it as a Knowledge to Action Network or a Knowledge by Action Network or a Knowledge for Action Network, whichever proposition suits you. But the idea is to connect knowledge and action and think about this as a joint activity. The vertical columns over there are the three themes on which much of future Earth science can be encapsulated. So dynamic planet is the theme of measuring ecosystem parameters, everything from carbon in the atmosphere to nitrogen to acidification in the oceans, etc. All the natural science that comes is probably the dynamic planet. The sustainable development theme is about making understanding global changes, social changes that are already happening, economic changes, urbanization changes that need to be addressed in the context of planetary changes. And transformations to sustainability is a theme of how do we bring about mega transformations? Because we believe that we need to move from this period of last 300 years of a certain form of development to a different kind of development, and it will require big changes which come under that theme. So on the first column, you have the 8 vision challenges that are in our document. And in our Tokyo meeting, we identified several knowledge action networks that we would like to produce, and these are now starting to be built up. The way they are going to be produced is we create a small development team consisting of our Science and Engagement Committee members and some members of the Secretariat and a few key external researchers. The purpose of this development team is to articulate what this particular knowledge action network would do. So if you take food, water, and energy nexus, there is a small group now of 5 or 6 people who are starting to do the internal thinking about what are the important communities that need to be brought together, what are the important research issues that these communities should be addressing, and how do we build a co-designed scoping process to build a research agenda and then conduct the research. I will give you one detailed example of future health, because I think so there's one on sustainable financial economic systems. So I want to take one of these knowledge action networks and push it down a few levels so that you can see how these will emerge. And we are right at the beginning. I mentioned November, this last month, the idea was approved and these networks are now going to unfold. So it's a very opportune time to be talking to you all, because you can already notice that a number of these address the issue that you are studying in your work. So this is a good time for us to have this conversation so that we can get you engaged in it in a deep way. Okay, so the Health Knowledge Action Network. this conversation has been going on within Future Earth for at least a year and a half, primarily driven by the chairperson of our engagement committee, who is, as I mentioned earlier, the Minister for Environment of a previous government in India. And his big claim has been that no politician is going to listen to you guys unless you start addressing those issues which affect politics. And in his view, health is where environment and the challenges meet the political arena. So he's been saying you have to create something on environmental health and some kind of a engagement. Now if you look at the health field, of course, it's got so many different research programs, so many different actors, it's a very crowded area. So we've been talking to a group of people. Lancet Commission was formed last year. It produced a report this July. Andy Haynes and Tony Capon from UNU in Malaysia were involved in it. So we started talking to the Lancet Commission to help us figure out what would be the next direction for health. And this is, of course, part of our vision challenge. And in terms of our evolving interest in it, the Lancet Commission was kind of a watershed for us. We looked at this report and we've been involved in sort of understanding their thinking. And it became plain that one direction in which health would benefit by going in terms of research is to think about health in a little different way than the way research has been cast in the past. So the past research on health thinks about health as something that happens to you and me as individuals. Your health is bad, my health is bad. We go to the doctor, he gives us a pill, or he does surgery on us and fixes us and we are fine. Well, this view of health is certainly beneficial to the pharmaceutical industry and perhaps to the hospital system, but is fundamentally challenged by the Lancet Commission. And the Lancet Commission is pushing us to think about health as a socio-ecological phenomenon. It's what you eat, it's how you work, it's how you play, it's how you transport yourself, how you sleep, how you live, who you live with, your community. All of that is what constitutes your health. So you can't, and then it's not just you and your family and your community, it's also the plants and the animals that are around you that collectively determine. So there's this one health concept that in some countries is gaining currency. It's the idea that planetary health and human health are indivisibly interlinked. You cannot think of human health as something that happens to the human organism alone. And we thought this was an interesting way of thinking about health, and if we were serious about this idea of health, then we needed to do research. And the Health Can is one mechanism to bring together people who are interested. Now, it's not clearly a new area. There are already many NGOs, there are many health groups, there are many UNU Institute that is very interested, already doing work. So we're not claiming that we've come up with something new, but we do want to make this into a significant stream. We would like to identify a group of communities and scholars and research programs and agendas. We would like to take this agenda to the Belmont Forum and to other people who fund this kind of research or the Gates Foundation and say, we need another $100 million to bring to science, to do science on health in this way. So that is our concept of a CAN. We want to identify arenas in which work is needed. We want to be able to build a new transdisciplinary stakeholder-engaged community around that question. And we want to bring net new financial resources to bear on it. We are not a funding organization ourselves. We are not a bank that you can come to and ask for money for your research project. But we are hoping that in every one of these areas, we will be able to cast the question in a different way and bring new stakeholders to the table. So for example, in the economic systems and financial and economic systems CAN, we believe that businesses who have perpetrated the past series of models of business need to rethink them, and they should be funding what goes on in the future. So we are not opposed to bringing in new sets of funders into the funding mix. We know that science is cautious. It's also been somewhat leery about going beyond public funding. In fact, 95 or more % of our own legacy science is funded by government. But the government in virtually every country that we are talking to is running deficit budgets, is cutting back on science. In the country that I'm now based in, Canada, we had 40% cut in social science under Mr. Harper, and everybody who takes money from the Canadian government until Mr. Harper was relieved of his duties had to actually report to a government department before they could publish a paper. So many governments are putting draconian measures. We think it's time for a little bit more democratization of the science funding game, and we are committed to taking it in that direction. Okay, so health, the kind of contributions we hope to make in this general broad arena of health. If you start thinking about social health, there is a lot of ecological data out there. We have satellites, we have terrestrial data stations that all need to be connected to human health parameters. There are modeling techniques that might be helpful to users in healthcare. So we think that we can identify some gaps and bring some new ways of doing science, both in a transdisciplinary as well as a stakeholder-engaged way, and help test new hypotheses. We would also like to bring more attention to a different set of diseases. Historically, the sort of the pharmaceutical model of science, if medical science, has been around infectious diseases, because then you can cure it by giving an antidote. But trying to move more towards non-communicable diseases such as obesity and diabetes and malnutrition, which you might consider as a kind of lifestyle disease. And the numbers are just astounding. We always talk in terms of food, water, and energy of 1 billion people that are still hungry. And we forget that almost 2 billion people have diabetes. So the problem of food is not just the shortage of food for some, it's also the misuse of food by others. And we need to think about these in connected ways. And what we are hoping to do by architecting an inclusive, interdisciplinary agenda is to be able to make these connections in new and interesting ways. Okay, so in terms of where we are with the health can right now, we have had for 20 years a core project called EcoHealth that's based out of New York. So those people are of course playing a key role in the development team. Andy Haynes has agreed to be a leader. He's also one of the people who has a very wide network of health science researchers across the globe. The Rockefeller Foundation has just funded a workshop. They call it a Bellagio workshop, which is, they have only a dozen of these each year, and we were lucky enough to get into one of those slots. So that will be happening. It will be the first research scoping workshop where we would invite, do a convening of maybe 40, 50 experts from around the world to start scoping out what is it that needs to be done here. Tony Capon from UNU has kindly offered to make a 5-year commitment to helping run this operation from a Secretariat standpoint. And there are about 20 other experts from different parts of the world that have expressed interest in contributing their ideas, their thoughts, their goodwill, their time. And we have 2 other governments, the government of China and the government of Korea, who are interested in investing money into this, even though they don't know more than 1 paragraph description of what the hell this is going to turn out to be. So we think it's very exciting if you can get governments interested on the basis of 1 paragraph. I wish it was that easy to get money, but we think that if we are creative in designing these questions in new and exciting ways, we will be able to garner support. Now clearly China is very interested in this for obvious reasons. Their health today, the challenge of health today is largely an environmental challenge. Yes, they have still poverty and hunger, but those things I think they seem to have a handle on. But one of the unintended consequences of the kind of prosperity that they have been striving for in the last 20 years or 30 years has been the cost to human health. The numbers that we are hearing on excess deaths out of China are now over 4 million a year, attributable to environmental related issues. This is a big political issue for stability of China. It's a big question for people on the ground. You see every day and you hear in newspapers. So we think this issue is very, very important, and China with 1.7 billion people, and I think India is not far behind. In fact, the most polluted city now in the world is in India. It's New Delhi. So these questions are important. They are going to become more important as urbanization expands. We know that in the next 30 years, another 2.5 billion people are going to become urban dwellers, and that is equivalent to putting one city of 1 million people, creating one new city of 1 million people every 10 days. So you can see the scale of these issues, and we need thinking at that scale. We need thinking both at the global scale and then converting it into regional and local scale so that we can implement. And we know for sure we cannot do it by ourselves. So we reach out to people like you, Zeph and UNU and other researchers that already are doing good work in this area, and see where we can do collaboration. And I'm going to stop talking very quickly because this potential collaboration opportunities is where we want to focus mostly on. And in the next slide or two, I had tried to put together from just talking to Jakob and others at UNU where we might see some possibilities. So let me just point out a few, but the real interesting part will be when in talking to you and getting your ideas on where we could collaborate. So first thing we are doing is trying to create something called a Future Earth Open Network. This is an attempt to build community at scale quickly. It is driven by a group of some young, very tech-savvy research enabling officers that we have hired in Stockholm and in Colorado, who are working with Google and with a few other network and media consulting companies to see how within the next 12 months we could build a global network of scientists and stakeholders interested in the agenda that we are pushing over here. Of course, it will be driven by a lot by the digital technologies and social media technologies, but we also wanted to have access to Africa and China, where these technologies are not so easy to come by, so there will be a sort of a counterpart on trying to engage by pen and paper and other means. The purpose of the network is to first of all bring the community together, but also to do some matching of interests across different countries, because that is in our interest when we go and make arguments to Belmont Forum for international funding or funding beyond boundaries. Having a network which already has people from different parts of the world is going to be a useful asset. I would invite you to look at our website and look at the core projects. There are 23 of them. I'm sorry I can't give you even a thumbnail impression of each, but please do spend a minute or two in the ones that you are interested in, because each of those projects can be a venue for collaboration, the core projects. In addition, there are the 7 knowledge action networks, which you will not find on our website as of now because they were just approved in November and the media on it is starting to come out, but in January you will find descriptions of those. So you can see where some of your interests connect with those knowledge action networks. In addition, we have a couple of programs in capacity building focused on Africa and South Asia, and a data task force, which is going to be a huge program just simply because data is happening. Whether we like it or not, it is like a force of nature in itself. And we are collecting huge amounts. Each of our core projects is collecting satellite data or terrestrial data or digital data, and there is no compatibility between them, and they don't talk to each other. So there's a huge challenge for science on making this data meaningful, making it available democratically and freely to people, and getting data aggregated at scales that make scientific sense and can help in analysis. So if those of you are interested in the data side, that would be an opportunity for collaboration. I think we could begin by mapping some interests across ZEF and UNU and Future Earth. Make the connections on who needs to talk to who. I'm particularly interested in seeking new transformation opportunities. What are the sort of the pilot projects or the leading projects that will actually change the game in terms of reaching sustainability and climate solutions? Engaging students into Future Earth Early Career Network. I understand that you all have over 150 doctoral students over here, which I didn't realize till this morning. We would invite each one of you to be part of our early career network. And this is the most amazing part of Future Earth. When I arrived in February, till about May, I did not know about this program that had sort of been on a low profile. But then we started reaching out to these networks, and we found out that there are 20 networks out there of young early career researchers who want to do transdisciplinary stakeholder-engaged science. So our effort is to try to bring these groups together. And those of you who want to be part of it, there is a monthly teleconference that takes place, or a web conference, and you can join that. And then finally, capacity building within communities. This is an area that is of particular interest. As I mentioned in the beginning, science for scientists is the past. Science for policy is what we are starting to do, but science for society and communities is where we want to be in the next 50 years. So we want to start thinking about what kind of programs would help us there. And I'll stop over there, and rather than questions, maybe we can open up the conversation to what's going on over here. I got a good overview from your committee this morning, but I would like to hear from researchers what their thoughts are on how we might be able to collaborate. I would also be very open to any comments, criticisms, points of skepticism, because I get enough of that, or areas in which you think we can improve. So the floor is open. Thank you very much for your patience.
Yeah, I think Paul has already invited questions. Yeah. Thank you very much, first of all, for your very colorful overview. I think you have also seen that although many structures are starting to be there, things are still in a design phase. So if you bring in new themes, actually, you can also define models of how to bring them in. So this is the ideal point in time to get connected to future. Detlef?
Yeah, my name is Detlef Müller-Mahn. I'm teaching development geography at this university. And we are currently working on putting together a large consortium at the University of Bonn and Cologne on the topic that we call African futures. So my question goes into this direction. The agenda you presented here was around closing the gap, integration between sciences, transdisciplinary approaches. That's all fine also with us, and I think we all believe this is very important. But one notion you did not define and you did not talk about is future. And my question is whether in this idea, the concept of future is more than just closing the gap and reaching to a consensus. The future, as we all know, is a battleground. It's open. It's not clear how the future will be, and it is not simply an extrapolation of what we are observing in the present. It's a political question. Who decides about the future and things like that. And what we are discussing in this research group here at the moment is how we can address these questions of how the future is actually produced, not only in consensus, but also in conflict. And how do we get along with questions where we will never reach the consensus, but where parts of the society will simply be kept in the shadow and will be kept silent. I've also been in Paris for the past 2 weeks. So what happened to the groups that were not allowed into Le Bourget, that remained at the alternative summit outside? What happens to what they wanted to put into the agreement? These would be questions I would also find interesting to be addressed by Future Earth, and to put the focus not only on science and social science linkages, but also to include questions of governance, of disconsent, of conflict. and how that affects the production of the future.
Yeah.
So it was not a question, sorry.
No, but I can resonate to a number of riffs on your note over there. And let me just begin with governance, because that is sort of goes to the heart of it. We do have a core project called Earth Systems Governance, and that seeks to understand the institutional structures within which current or past Earth systems governance have occurred, and what might be other more interesting, flexible, innovative, and responsive governance mechanisms and institutional mechanisms to deal with future issues. It does address the question of different values in different countries and different parts of the world, and the need for bringing them in and making it part of the conversation. That particular core project is likely to be playing a very important role in the Transformations Knowledge Action Network. It's a complex question. I think we don't have ready-made answers for all parts of the world or for all socioeconomic groups. One thing we are very confident of is that the solutions cannot be top-down. They cannot be just from the north to the south. They cannot be just from the more mature generations to the younger ones. That there has to be a much more open and democratic process for these answers to emerge. And we are also mindful that there are more vulnerable populations and most vulnerable populations, and that somehow the debate on the future needs to move away from where we are to genuinely addressing concerns of these vulnerable populations. And I think I can't claim answers, but I can claim some learnings from our short 6-month experience of trying to open up 3 or 1 office in Africa. So when I arrived, the first public presentation that I made, the first question from the floor was, "Oh, you look like you guys are global, you're all white, you're all north, you're all old guys. How are you going to solve the problem? There's no Africa, there's no China, there's no India over here." I took that to heart. I said, we're going to put something in Africa before the year is over. And I initiated a set of conversations with people around in Montreal. And I'm telling you the story in a little extended way because it addresses your question ultimately. We had a lady from Rwanda show up at one of our breakfast meetings, turned out to be the High Commissioner of Rwanda to Canada, and said, "You want an office in Africa? We'll give you an office in Africa. Here, how many people do you need? How much space do you need? How much money do you need?" I was just so stunned. We started talking to her, and we wrote to all our colleagues in Africa saying that we can have an office in Africa. And the first response we got was, "No, you can't do that. You can't have an office in Africa and Rwanda. We want you to make this an open call because we can get many offices, many people interested." I said, for 3 years, nobody has opened up their purses and said they are interested in an office in Africa. You want me to turn down an offer from Rwanda so that you can generate alternatives? Well, they said, yeah, we want you to do that. And I am glad to report that I was wrong. When we actually put out a call for proposals, we got 20 proposals for offices in Africa from 13 countries. Not all of them are acceptable as offices. Some of them don't have the resources we need. But there are at least a few that we can create in offices. And the biggest thing that came out of it was they said, we don't want an office of the kind you think of as an office. We want an office that is genuinely open to thinking about African science as an entity with its own integrity, that the needs of Africa and the diversity of needs in Africa need to be recognized. We need to be interacting with the many different policy-making groups in Africa, etc., etc. So they created a whole agenda and a whole conversation that was very educational to our Science and Engagement Committee, our Global Hub people, and has completely changed our approach to thinking about Africa as a place where science needs to happen differently in response to their needs. So I can tell you that we are thinking, we are sensitive to the kind of concerns you are raising, And hopefully the result that will come out from our Africa experience, which we also hope to take to South Asia, another very complicated part of the world, that result would be much more in line with the sort of values that you are reflecting. And I don't have ready-made answers for this, and we're not taking a cookie-cutter model all over and saying, this is the solution, this is how you will bring science. I am realizing more and more that what we've been calling science in the North might have very little relevance. And there might be many different sciences out there that need to find a place at the table. And this needs, and it's not just science. It is also the arts, it is also the humanities, it's also the laws and the institutional frameworks. And we are hoping within Future Earths to open that conversational space to aesthetic inquiry and to faith-based inquiry and to other systems that make us humans and make human societies move forward. Yeah.
Okay, Eva?
Yeah, my name is Eva Jukana. I'm from ZA, the Department for Political and Cultural Change, currently interim director. And I would totally agree to my colleague that I really do think that the political and cultural aspects of these global changes and transformation are still not properly addressed or explicitly addressed. Anyways, thanks a lot for this insightful presentation. I have one question. I liked in your presentation that you addressed our consumption patterns or the supply side. So we all do agree that we need to change our consumption patterns. I wonder if you also address or want to address the supply side, the production patterns. So when we look at the markets, the deregulation of markets, and also when I had a look at your acceleration curve, it was interesting that with the deregulation of the markets, this global rise or great acceleration has started. So, and how can you imagine addressing also this problem, the production patterns in the world? And then I was wondering about, there's a concern, the more global we look at the problems, the less contextualized we can address them. Do you have an idea how to solve this problem?
Yeah. So with regard to the production and consumption, one of the goals in our vision document actually does encapsulate both consumption and production and the need to decarbonize both of them. And we come from a legacy of a number of programs that have been studying the Global Carbon Project, for example, being one of them, that is looking at not only carbon in energy systems, but carbon in broad production systems and in the supply chain. And we are also coming to the realization that not all carbon is equally bad. So, and that we need to address production systems, energy systems being primary, but also all the other production systems and their supplies. There are a number of cans that will address this. One of them is the Sustainable Economic and Financial Systems can. And in that we have a group, one community of researchers that comes from operations, business studies side, who do sort of circular economy and green production and green supply chain management and those kind of issues. So we hope to draw from that community lessons that we need to bring to the production side. The other piece of the production part is that we are trying to think about production in different parts of the world in more differentiated ways. So rather than having production be just a continuous thing from the north to the south, are there opportunities for leapfrogging production technologies? So if you look at phones are, for example, a good example where if we just had to follow the northern model of phone line laying, which is terrestrially tear up places, put tower, build poles and connect wires, it could not be done as quickly. So there are other ways of producing telecommunication services that are less eco-harmful, if you will. And it's not just in telecom, in many other sectors of production, there is opportunity for leapfrogging. So we need to think about production, and especially in the context of decarbonization in more complex, sophisticated ways. The question of the context and whether we know how to make these contextualized. So structurally, I think we are putting into place these regional entities. The explicit purpose of them is to bring in context. They are, and it's also linked to a kind of pan-centric leadership approach where we don't expect our hubs, our regional centers to be leading everything. There is already good contextual work going on in a whole bunch of partners that we want to work with. And we see ourselves as facilitators, mostly as accelerators, if you will, rather than as the people who are actually building the context. So maybe we can bring some correction tendencies where the context is skewed in favor of a particular economic class or a particular type of social formation. But we think that impulse for that change and contextualization has to come from the ground. And we will keep a keen ear open to see where people have been successful in doing good contextualized work. And we would like to have that brought to the rest of science, because I think science as an enterprise has been particularly blind to context, in the sense that we want to do objective, systemic, rational, enclosed thinking. And one result of that is that you have to hermetically seal the object that you are studying. This is an epistemic challenge for science, and we would like to drive down the issue of context to the level of epistemic thinking and say, how do you create more open knowledge that is sensitive to context? So those are just sort of some reactions to your thought, perhaps not a good solution to the problem. Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm told that we have to stop here due to, I think, other schedules, meetings that are happening in here. I think, although I have to terminate this discussion, or
let me thank you from CEF side. It's great that you are here. I think we are very convinced, and you are very convincing, that future Earth will add cutting transactions costs in science and will facilitate scale. That's what we urgently need on the whole sustainability research. And please come again. Next time you will also tell us how you assure quality, science quality in this monumental network. And in the health field, I think we are just positioning ourselves, and we would be very interested to be partners there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so although we have to terminate this discussion, look at it as the start of the discussion here. And you have seen UNU in some of the slides replaced them by CEF or by any other institution you're coming from. I mean, this is just I think the start. I've always told Paul that Bonn is one of the unique places actually futures can couple into, and I think we'll follow up on this.
And may I blame the lack of ZEF logo on it on Jakob, because he got me in such an interesting conversation that I was hoping to spend 30 minutes on my presentation before, and I would have changed all of that, but you take the blame for that.
Come again.
Thanks all for coming.